Okay, in this section we're going to review the priorities here for Module 3. So hopefully after listening to this slide set and completing the reading and watching some of the videos I put up there for you, we'll have a better idea of the difference between misinformation and disinformation and how it affects vaccine confidence. We'll also hope to have you review a couple techniques for ways to make sure that you don't become vulnerable to misinformation, and have some tools for checking your own bias. And then lastly, we really want you to develop strategies to respond to inaccuracies and false statements, no matter what the setting and no matter what cultural or language environment. So there are some tools you can use. So first up, let's talk about definitions. That's where I always like to start. So infodemics, these are defined as an overabundance of information. And when that happens, people easily get overwhelmed and they're not sure what's true and what's false. Infodemiology is actually a term coined just in the last 3 years, which is kind of exciting, but also unnerving. The science of managing infodemics is utilizing techniques that compare the volume of misinformation and disinformation, kind of looking at it like a disease pathogen that can cause epidemics, and certain types of misinformation can go viral, so to speak, like there could be an outbreak. So one of the pioneers in this field, Heidi Larson, she recommends that although infodemics and misinformation that goes viral tend to be really negative, there's always the opportunity that credible information and trusted voices can shine through. So just to give you another example of the impact that false claims can have on vaccination rates, we all remember the MMR paper by Wakefield, where he tried to draw a causal association between MMR and autism. And what we can see here is the MMR rates in the UK before and after the Wakefield paper. So you can see how it kind of plummeted and then slowly but surely started kind of eking back up. So that paper was published here in '98, and then it was retracted in 2011. And we could probably have a whole semester course on why it took so long to retract that paper, but the damage was significant and continues. He's a celebrity in the anti-vax community. So how that kind of is laid bare in terms of how people form their attitudes about vaccines is that uncertainty and distrust of vaccines can manifest in these general ways. So overall, we tend to see about maybe 60 to 70% tend to be very likely to get vaccines or follow their doctor's recommendation, while 20 to 30 kind of unsure, and maybe 5 to 10%, in this case with COVID vaccine, it's a little bit higher, very unlikely. So the question for us as healthcare providers, public health professionals, and community health workers is, what are we going to do about that? So we know that people are worried about the benefits of vaccine. They're worried about any kind of unforeseen long-term side effects. That's sort of a manifestation of the Wakefield issue. Other concerns about commercial profiteering, and somehow the pharmaceutical companies are manipulating things financially and don't have anyone's best interest, and so on and so forth. And then there's this natural immunity phenomenon, which is really a marketing term that's been kind of promoted by the likes of Mercola and these outfits that will sell all kinds of fake cures for a significant amount of money. So the other thing to be aware of is to know the opposition and to know the tactics that they employ. So just to kind of go over this slide, and this is from Project Vector and the UNICEF Misinformation Management Guide. One's a website, you should become familiar with it, and the other one is the handbook that I'll put in this module as well. So why do people engage in proliferating or spreading this information? A lot of them do it. A lot of the motivators have to do with something related to profit. A lot of times there's significant financial interests at play. It's quite lucrative to sell books and go to conferences and run trainings and stuff, all related to false claims and false cures. Political leverage is another reason. That's another motivator for people to traffic misinformation about vaccines. And then, of course, power is, it could be in the form of prestige, especially with academic contrarians that like to make statements that are not in line with scientific consensus. So some of the things that they'll use to spread that information is to cherry pick data that agrees with their, bias and their position. They will reference fake experts, often people that don't have any expertise in that particular area. They will use techniques related to race baiting or trying to manipulate the community mind in perhaps a marginalized group, that the oppressing race is taking advantage of them, and these vaccines are really designed to hurt them. They'll use that a lot, which has some historical reference, right? So that has the power to really penetrate in those communities. And we saw that with the measles outbreaks in the Somali communities. I believe it was in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where that happened. There was so you really magnify that fear factor, and it allows that false claim to really stick, and it's hard to unstick it. And then there's value baiting. There's this issue around freedom of speech. Is all speech free? Is there no limitations on those types of things? Individual rights versus public health. And they use these recurring themes where they've got, they talk about various harms that have occurred. Sometimes in history there have been harms, and so they use that to really help proliferate these false claims. Like I talked about, the pharmaceutical industry, other federal health authorities, they use these things to sort of magnify distrust. That's really the main goal. And then there's some key players that really are the source, if of anything, like the index case, if we were going to use infectious disease terms, that help to spread these false claims, and then they proliferate outward from there. So things for you to keep in mind. Again, just to be clear about these definitions, information is data that's actually meaningful and actionable. Rumors are unverified stories. These tend to spread really easily. Misinformation, as we talked about before, this is incorrect or misleading information that can be shared with or without the intent. So, might be shared by somebody by accident, or it's intentional. And then disinformation is 100% falsehoods that are intentionally spread for profit, prestige, or power. So how do you protect yourself? I think it's important to kind of have some tools at the ready so you can protect yourself from fake news. So first thing I always do is consider the source and the date and look at the author. Is it recent? Does this person have expertise? And what is this website that I'm reading this on? And who funds this website? And I check those types of things. Then I also check my biases. I think it's important to cultivate like your own sense of your own biases, and am I leaning into this because I have a pre-existing belief about something? The other thing to be aware of is to read beyond the headline. So headline writers are not copywriters, so they write the headline often without the consultation of the reporter or the folks that were quoted. So headline writers are writing to grab clicks, and you really need to read beyond that headline. Then check the sources that are cited in that piece. Are they from reputable resources? Is it too wild to be true? Is it satire? Those can be big clues. And then, of course, ask someone with content expertise if they've heard of this and what they think about it, and see if you can reconfirm the claims on a reputable website that you're aware of. Last couple slides here. We've got a couple resources I wanted to share with you, and make sure that you know these strategies. So take a look at the Misinformation Management Field Guide as well as the Debunking Handbook, and there's some really helpful strategies for both pre-bunking, which is a form of inoculation where you try to anticipate what's coming, warn that it's coming, and then explain why it's going to be false. And then debunking, which is dealing with information that's already out there. So when you see it, you know exactly how you're going to debunk it. Then you can kind of think about, is this a really penetrating rumor or piece of misinformation that we're going to see everywhere? If so, do we need a bigger response in some way to get out in front of it? The other thing to think about is when you're providing accurate information, to really reframe it. You don't just want to allow the person sharing the misinformation to frame it for you. So you frame it using one tactic that you can use is this truth sandwich. So start with what's true, explain why the false claim is false, and then how it happens to be false, and then close with that fact again. So a couple strategies and techniques to think about there. And so just to summarize, we've gone over how misinformation fuels behavior, the information we consume, the books we read, the websites, the social media sites, the movies we watch. All of that helps influence our behavior, right? So if misinformation can take over there, we might make behavior decisions that are based on inaccurate claims. The other thing we want to do is know the opposition and get really clear about the tactics that they use. And John Cook's work, he does a wonderful job of explaining those various tactics, and there's all kinds of different cognitive biases that they can take advantage of to sell those claims. So you really want to develop your spidey sense, those tools that I talked about where you go through the date and the author and try to reconfirm the claims elsewhere. That's going to contribute to your spidey sense for detecting misinformation and make you a little bit more immune to it when you run into it again. And then, of course, develop the techniques of debunking and pre-bunking and put them into action. You want to be sure to do that effectively and do it often. We've already learned over the last 20 years that ignoring the false claims about vaccines has led to a really dangerous situation with vaccine uptake and various outbreaks and such. So we really want to get on top of it and have everyone practicing these tools in their communities. So I hope that's helpful, and take a look at the resources in Module 3 before you move on to the next module.